Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to fix 20 years of trauma in 10 minutes. Spoiler alert, guys. You can't. You cannot fix 20 years trauma in 10 minutes. But it's, I think, a friendly reminder for you that that's not your job. But I do love to tell you, what can you do for people in 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and that you can actually be incredibly effective, even in times when you feel like this is way above your paycheck and there's no way that you can fix, like I said, 20 years trauma in 10 minutes. See, as helpers, we meet people at the worst possible time of their lives, but every single case is different, as you know, and some cases will be less complex, and some cases, incidents will take you down in a rabbit hole and then will lead you to issues you cannot fix in 10 minutes. So let's talk about, what do you do? Well, I actually would like to tell you a little bit of a story. Before I met Mike, my police officer, in 1999, when I walked into the police station, I was 21 years old, and I already came from 21 years of trauma. And the short story is, I grew up in Hungary communism, to a mother who had mental health issues, a father who was an alcoholic. We lived in extreme poverty. I had a brother. I was sick all the time. I died between the age of 0 to 3, only just for a few minutes, but I had a chronic bronchitis. My mom and dad fought like cats and dogs. All I know is how to be in trauma. All I can remember my entire life is how to go to safety, how to be on adrenaline, how to survive my mom's mood swings or the domestic fights, or how to pretend I'm not hungry when I'm starving, but I don't want to make my mom upset because we have no money. And the list goes on. But what I just described to you is probably very familiar to you. You deal with a lot of clients, patients who have a lot going on or had a very difficult life. But I think what's helpful for you to understand is how people feel. So when I walked into that station and met Mike, I didn't see the world the way regular people do. I had this fog. I see the world through a gray cloud. I'm always tired. I'm always exhausted. I'm always second guessing myself, and I'm always in crisis, and I don't even know it. I mean, when I got older, I realized that I'm always in crisis. But at that moment, when I was looking at Mike and I was telling him my story about being trafficked, I had to start from the very beginning. And there's so many things I didn't tell him. There's so many things I didn't even know that actually impacted me. I was sexually assaulted when I was a child, not once, but 3 times. But at the time, I didn't even know what that did to my brain and how did that make me feel and how did that impact decisions that I made later on in life. I didn't know that we lived in financial trauma. Those words didn't exist at the time. All I knew is that we never had money. And all of these things that happened and events impacted me from the age of 0. And those are the impacts that pile on a human being, their emotions, and they form them. And what happens is that every single traumatic situation forms a human being and basically forces them to come up with a coping mechanism. So it's very important to remember this. So in my case, my coping mechanism was when my mom started her mood swings and went from 0 to 10 and then went from, being all cool and calm. And then in literally 10 minutes, she start crying and screaming. And at the end, she wants to kill herself, or, the world is coming to an end, or she's going to die of a heart attack and we're going to lose her and we're going to be orphans. This was happening 4 times a day in our household. And you just never knew when it's going to start and you never knew when it's going to end. So what did that do to me as a child? I learned that there is no safe environment whatsoever. I was always on guard. I was always on adrenaline. And the other thing is my mom had no idea how to communicate. So it was either we are not talking or we are screaming and yelling at each other. So again, as a child, that's what I learned. I learned how to scream and yell. I did not learn how to communicate my emotions. And the other thing that did not happen in our house, there was no conversations. There was no, sweetheart, how are you feeling today? I had no idea I had feelings. I didn't even know what they were. So now imagine living in this state of being, which is called the survival mode, for 21 years, okay? And you just end up becoming a victim of everything, a victim of this, a victim of that, because that's all you know. So, of course, early on when I started dating, I only attracted abusive boyfriends or very old boyfriends because, like I said, I was sexually molested at a very young age by an older man. I got attracted to older men, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I didn't have a father in my household who would look after me. My mom was working all the time. Like I said, I came from a very chaotic childhood. But also my environment wasn't very helpful. When I became 15 years old after being sexually assaulted, I became very sexual, and which is one of the signs of being sexually abused as a child. But my community didn't help me, the teachers, there was no social workers. Instead, I was labeled with daddy issues and labeled being a prostitute. So that wasn't very helpful. So I'm not complaining, guys. I'm just saying that that's how you kind of become a basket case by the time you're 21 years old. And so I had a number of issues, and not to mention the financial trauma. I mean, we were always poor, but that's, due to a lot of things. But my mom had a very, very difficult relationship with money as well. I mean, she had many different mental health issues. One of them was the financial trauma. So the fights were always all about the money. We don't have enough money. My dad is drinking the money away. So I was terrified of money, and I had no idea how to make money. And I became exactly like my mom. It actually took me 45 years to learn about my mindset and my money mindset and where my financial trauma comes from. And it actually took me the last 3 to 4 years to take intense courses on how to clear my financial trauma and get out of financial crisis. That is a whole other topic that we're going to talk about. But let's get back to the main topic here, which is how do you fix 21 years of trauma in 10 minutes, which you can't. But what can you do to make that individual feel more comfortable? So here I am. I'm 21 years old. I have all kinds of unhealthy coping mechanisms on how to survive crisis situations. I don't know how to communicate. I don't understand my own emotions. And all I know is that I always find myself in the deepest poo-poo you can imagine. So years and years and years later, I learned about the ACE. So a ACE score is a tally of different types of abuse, neglect, and other hallmarks of a rough childhood. According to the Adverse Childhood Experience study, the rougher your childhood, the higher score is likely to be. And the more likely you're going to end up in a big poo-poo like I did. So let me tell you a little bit about this score first, and then we'll talk a bit more about what do you do with someone that you encountered who's sitting on years and years and years of trauma and acting out of trauma right in front of you. So here's the score. But what you need to understand is that a psychiatrist told me once that if a child experiences at the very least minimum of 4 of these events during their childhood, it's not a matter of if, it's a fact that they're going to have a very difficult journey. So here's the list. Physical abuse, I had that. Emotional abuse, check, check. Sexual abuse, check, check, check. Domestic violence, hell yeah. Parental substance abuse, I'm saying yes to that. Mental illness, yes, yes, yes. Suicide or death. So I actually witnessed with my own eyes my first suicide when I was 3 years old, and then 3 more, because in Hungary suicide is a thing. And then crime or imprisoned family members. So yeah, my mom got my dad arrested and he went to jail. So yeah, I always say if you do something, do it right. I mean, I scored all of them. So I guess I didn't have a lot of chances to, have a pretty good life at the beginning. But again, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying. So, and a lot of people that you're going to encounter going to have a very similar score as I did. And I think this is a good reminder to have it in the back of your head when you're dealing with them. And so now let's get to the cool part. Let's talk about what do you do with somebody who is sitting in front of you with years and years and decades of longs of trauma and either acting out of trauma or begging you for help. And you feel like you need to fix their entire life. Let's talk about that. So now that we have a good understanding of that things don't just happen overnight, their feelings, emotions, coping skills, mechanisms build up over the years. So the first thing we need to talk about is their communication skills. So please remember that when somebody comes from years and years and years of trauma, they may never have the chance to learn to communicate, to use their words. So you might be sitting in front of a 45 years old man or woman, but if they never actually learned and developed those skills on how to communicate their feelings in a healthy way, you might be actually dealing with someone who's emotionally equivalent to a toddler. But how many times you made that comment of, oh my gosh, I feel like sometimes I'm dealing with toddlers. That's because emotionally we are. So when I met Mike, the police officer, I was 21 years old. So when he looked at me, he thought I'm a young adult. And by all circumstances, I should know how to communicate my feelings. I should know how to react properly to things. But I knew none of it. All I knew is how to scream and yell, how to cry, and how to shut down when something is happening. That's all I knew. So when you're dealing with somebody who's sitting on years of trauma, it's going to be really hard for you to talk to them the way you want to talk to a regular person. So the first thing is just remember where they come from. Just remember that they're sitting in their trauma right now. And another thing is, obviously, they are in the middle of crisis or in a situation if they have to sit in front of you, which means they are triggered right now. These are triggers that they built for years and years. These triggers are sitting inside of them. They get triggered by a smell. They get triggered by a noise. They get triggered by a mother. They got triggered by the bank taking their money. They get triggered. They are sitting in trigger. And a trigger is this horrible feeling that you are very familiar with because you have triggers too. So the trigger is when the only way I can explain it from the trauma survival perspective is that my brain literally gets filled with blood and I can't see anything. I just feel anger and I feel frustration and I just want to scream and yell because that's all I know how to do. So what do you do? What do you do when you're sitting in front of someone in whatever situation that is, and their life literally fell apart, and they look at you to fix it? Well, first, please remember that their life didn't just fall apart. What happened in this specific situation is just one of the symptoms of everything that's been going wrong for the last many, many years. Now, I'm not actually talking about situations where you attend to a car accident or something like that, where, there's tragic outcomes like that of the family member or so on and so forth. In those cases, the individual's life literally just fall apart. But even so, again, you are not here to fix everything that they need to deal with right now. I think you're really just there to comfort them during a very scary and very difficult time. And they also going to be triggered. But that brings me back to what trigger is. Triggered is really the way people act when they act out of trauma. Triggers are things that cause reactivation of trauma symptoms, such as intrusive memories or hypervigilance. This is interesting. A person may feel such as running away or fighting or freezing or screaming and yelling, and their behavior may not make sense to others around them, nor can they control themselves. So what do? Number one, remember, you are not here to fix 21 years of trauma in 10 minutes because you can't. Number two, understand that people are talking out of trigger, and now that you know what trigger is, now you understand it's just how individuals communicate when they are coming from trauma. It also actually, to me, it's helpful when I try to visualize them as children, like a 6, 7 years old child. I try to imagine them. Who were they before all these terrible things happened to them? What was their hopes and dreams? And when was the last time did somebody actually sit down and talk to them, look them in the eye, and ask them how they're doing? When I was 21 years old, gone through everything that I gone through, finally by the time I met Mike, my police officer, and when he started listening to my story, he stopped at the beginning and he looked at me and he asked me, "Is there anything I can do for you right now?" He looked me in the eye, and honestly, for the very, very first time, I felt like I was seen and heard. You see, I went through my whole life up until then without parents, without support, without love. I mean, I did have some love when my mom was capable. She loved me as much as she could, but I wasn't seen or I wasn't heard, and I had no one to talk to. Nobody has ever asked me, how am I doing? I was 21 years old when for the first time it took a Canadian police officer in Canada to listen to a little bit of my story and then paused and asked, how am I doing? Can you imagine? So there's a very good chance that you might be that very first individual in this person's life who's going to pause for a second and ask, how are you doing? Now, I'm not suggesting to do this in the middle of their trigger, obviously. What you do in the middle of a trigger, you just sit in that space with them. Now, if they are, dangerous to themselves or others, then you do whatever you got to do for them to calm down. And then once they calm down, and once the clouds are gone, the blood is back to where it's supposed to be and not in the brain where you can't think straight, that's when you have a conversation with them. And honestly, it's as simple as that. So now that your client or patient is all calm and you can look them in the eye and you can make them feel like a human being, that's when you can have that conversation. And so this whole topic is about how do you fix, trauma in 10 minutes. I keep saying you can't, but what you can do is make them feel like a human being, maybe for the first time in their life. Honestly, as a survivor, I cannot tell you what a gift that is. I heard stories from other survivors that the reason why they got their life together, because that police officer, social service provider, or somebody, they believed in them. There's a survivor who was really well treated by a nurse, and she wanted to become a nurse, and she did become a nurse since then. There was a survivor who was caught by a police officer 25 years ago as a prostitute, and a police officer treated her like a human being. She was all drugged up and she was, just ready to get her other score. And a police officer sat with her, got her a cup of coffee, and just talked to her for half an hour. And that individual, 35 years later, found this police officer, called him, and thanked him very much. And she said, "You probably don't remember me, but you changed my life." So you see, you don't need millions of dollars. You don't need resources. Resources are always nice. But when you work with human beings and you're here to serve and help and protect, all you need to bring is your humanity. And you have plenty of it, which is why you became a helper. And as for me, what Mike done for me at the time, he was the first one who saw me as a human being. And in my head, I can't screw up. I need to get my life together because this man believed in me, trusted me, and he thought I can do it. See, that's another thing. We don't believe in ourselves whatsoever. I mean, there is 25 years or 30 years of evidence that I can screw up just about anything you put in my hand. But then people like Mike who came along and eventually mentors, and my husband, and that's a whole other conversation. But Mike was the first one who made me believe in myself. So those conversations you have with your clients, patients, once they are out of trigger, those are the conversations that can be completely life-changing. And you have the resources. All you need is you, the incredible you, the person who just wants to help. So you have everything you need within yourself and able to make a difference. And, I understand that it can be hard and it can get tiring. But if you just remember that you are not here to fix the world's problems, first of all, you didn't cause these problems. You're here to help. Second of all, when the triggers come out of people and they spit at you, try not to take it personal because it has literally nothing to do with you. They don't know you. They never met you. Just let them get through their triggers. Let them get through those moments of emotional pukes. And once they're calm, that's when you can get in and do your magic. That's how I got to where I am, thanks to Mike and thanks to many of you who are doing what you are doing. And what's so incredible about our job is that we have the honor and the privilege to sit with them through their most darkest, difficult times and watch them walking out of that trigger, walking out of those emotions, and see what they could become if just one person believed in them. And that one person who can kickstart their new life could be you. I cannot think of a bigger honor and privilege than that. So you guys are amazing. I would certainly not be here if it wasn't for you guys. So just keep going, keep being awesome. And remember, the world needs you guys. I need you guys. We all need you guys. You guys are awesome. So I hope this one was helpful. Lot to unpack, lot to reflect on. So take your time with this one. We also do have a course specifically for those of you who work with victims of human trafficking. You can check that out online. Other than that, again, thank you for all you do and hope to connect with you on the next episode.